What if a man from the future armed with stolen technology, a fabricated legend, and an ego too big for any galaxy suddenly appeared in the disciplined, rule-bound universe of Starfleet, and claimed he was its greatest hero? What if everything he said was a lie, except the danger he brought with him? The stars had seen explorers, they had seen conquerors, they had even seen gods, but they had never seen someone like him. A golden streak tore through space, not a ship, not a shuttle, but a ripple in time itself, folding and collapsing like a wound in reality. Alarms screamed across a distant Federation outpost as sensors struggled to interpret what they were seeing. Temporal distortion, magnitude off the charts, stabilizing field collapsing. Whatever it is, it's coming through. And then, silence. In the vacuum between seconds, something emerged. A man floating, smiling. "Okay," he muttered to himself, adjusting the glowing circuitry on his wrist. Note to self: next time, don't punch coordinates mid-quantum turbulence. He looked around vast space, unfamiliar star systems, a constellation he didn't recognize. His suit flickered with energy, its golden plating gleaming against the darkness. "Right," he said with a grin. New timeline, new audience. Booster Gold had arrived. But this wasn't his universe, and in this one, history didn't know his name. A Starfleet vessel dropped out of warp nearby, sleek and purposeful, its hull reflecting starlight like a blade. Inside, officers stared in disbelief. "Captain," one said, voice tight, "there's a human out there, unassisted." "Impossible, not anymore." The man in gold waved. Booster Gold had always wanted to be famous. He just didn't realize. This universe had no tolerance for legends built on lies, and somewhere, deep in the fractured layers of time he had just disturbed, something ancient had awakened, something that had been waiting for a mistake exactly like this. And now, it knew he was here. The game had begun. What if the moment Starfleet brought him aboard, they realized this hero from the future knew things he shouldn't and was hiding things he couldn't afford to reveal? What if the truth about Booster Gold wasn't just embarrassing, but dangerous enough to fracture the timeline itself? The transporter beam shimmered, dissolving the vacuum around Booster Gold into a cascade of blue light. For a split second, his body felt stretched across centuries, every molecule pulled taut between past and future, before snapping back into place. He materialized on the transporter pad with a dramatic flourish, landing on one knee like he'd rehearsed it. "Stick the landing," he whispered under his breath, then looked up with a dazzling grin. "You're welcome." The transporter room was silent. 5 Starfleet officers stood frozen, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright suspicion. Their uniforms were crisp, their posture rigid, everything about them screamed discipline, order, protocol. Everything Booster Gold wasn't. The officer in command stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Identify yourself." Booster rose slowly, brushing invisible dust off his gleaming suit. "Michael John Carter," he said, voice smooth. "But you can call me Booster Gold. Time traveler, hero, protector of, well, wherever I happen to be." A beat. No one smiled. "Time traveler," the officer repeated flatly. Booster chuckled. "Yeah, I get that a lot. Look, I know this is a lot to take in, but if you check your records—" "Oh wait," he snapped his fingers. "You won't find me. Not yet. I'm from the future. Big deal there. Huge statues, sponsorships, the whole thing. Still nothing." The officer tapped her barge security to transporter room. Booster's grin flickered. "Just for a second." "Okay," he said quickly, raising his hands. "Let's not escalate this into a phaser me on-site situation. I'm friendly. Mostly depends on the day." 2 security officers entered, phasers drawn but lowered. The tension thickened, heavy and suffocating. "Captain's orders," the officer said. "You'll come with us." Booster sighed dramatically. "You know, in my time, they usually at least offer a welcome speech, maybe a parade. Definitely better lighting." As they escorted him out, his eyes darted around, absorbing everything. The architecture, the technology, the insignia. His suit's internal AI skeets flickered to life beside him, a small hovering drone projecting faint holographic readouts. "Boss," Skeets whispered in a tone only Booster could hear, "this isn't any timeline we've catalogued." Booster's smile tightened. "I noticed. This appears to be an entirely separate universe." "Yeah," Booster muttered under his breath. "That part I didn't notice." They entered a turbolift. The doors slid shut with a quiet hiss, sealing Booster in with his armed escorts. "Deck 1, the officer ordered as the lift began to move. Booster leaned casually against the wall, trying to maintain his trademark confidence, but inside, something was gnawing at him, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had jumped timelines before, risky, sure, but calculated, controlled. This wasn't controlled. Skeets, he murmured, barely moving his lips. Tell me, we can jump back. There was a pause, a long one. Temporal navigation systems are offline, Skeets replied quietly. The jump destabilized our chronal anchor. Booster's heart skipped. Define offline. I cannot lock on to our original timeline. At present, we are stranded. Stranded. The word echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Booster Gold, the self-proclaimed greatest hero you've never heard of, trapped in a universe where he was nobody, worse where he didn't belong. The turbo lift doors opened. The bridge, wide, expansive, alive with controlled motion. Officers moved with precision, every action deliberate, every word measured. At the center sat the Captina figure of quiet authority, watching Booster with an intensity that cut deeper than any weapon. Report, the captain said. Unidentified individual claiming to be a time traveler. Sir, the officer replied. No record in Federation databases. Of course not. Booster interjected with a grin. I'm ahead of your time. Literally. The captain stood, stepping down from the command platform. Each footstep was calm, calculated. Mr. Carter, the captain said, voice steady. You've entered Federation space under highly unusual circumstances. You claim to be from the future. You possess technology we do not recognize, and yet, you expect us to trust you. Booster spread his arms. When you say it like that, it sounds bad, it sounds dangerous. The word hung in the air. Booster's grin faltered again, just slightly. Look, he said, his tone shifting, becoming more earnest. I get it, you don't know me, but I'm not the bad guy here. I help people. That's kind of my thing, is it? The captain asked. Before Booster could respond, an officer at the science station spoke up, her voice tight with urgency. Captain, I'm detecting residual temporal radiation from his arrival point. It's spreading. The captain repeated. Yes, sir, like a fracture. The timeline is destabilizing. The room fell silent. Booster's stomach dropped. Ah, he said slowly. Define destabilizing. The officer turned, her expression grim. Events are shifting. Small inconsistencies at first, but if it continues, it could cascade. Another officer finished. Rewrite entire sectors of history. The captain's gaze snapped back to Booster. What did you bring with you, Mr. Carter? Booster opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since he arrived, he didn't have a clever answer, because deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a ripple, and ripples became waves. Somewhere, in the unseen currents of time, something had latched on to that ripple. Something old, something patient, something that had just found a way in. Booster swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I broke something. And as the stars outside the viewport flickered just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to be noticed, the universe itself seemed to shudder, as if it agreed. What if the fracture Booster created wasn't just breaking time, but rewriting reality around them, and only he could see what was changing? What if the hero who built his life on fake fame was suddenly the only one who knew the truth, and no one believed him? The first change was small, so small, most wouldn't even notice. But Booster did. He was standing at the edge of the bridge, arms crossed, trying to look confident while Starfleet officers quietly debated whether he was a threat, a liar, or both. When his eyes drifted to the main view screen, the stars shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, just wrong. A constellation he didn't recognize twisted slightly, as if something had nudged it out of place. Booster blinked. Skeets, he whispered under his breath. Tell me, I'm imagining things. I'm afraid you are not, sir, Skeets replied. Stellar positions are fluctuating beyond expected cosmic drift. Booster straightened, his pulse quickening. That's not how stars work. No, sir, it is not. He turned toward the crew. Hey, quick question. Anyone else notice the sky just move? Blank stares. The captain narrowed his eyes. Explain. The stars, Booster said, pointing at the screen. They just shifted. That's not normal, even for you guys. The science officer glanced at her readings. No anomalies detected. Booster's stomach twisted. No, that's not right. They moved. I saw it. Mr. Carter, the captain said, voice calm but firm. Our sensors show no such change. Booster laughed nervously. Great, awesome. So either your sensors are broken, or I'm losing my mind. Skeets hovered closer, his tone low. "Sir, I believe you may be experiencing temporal displacement awareness." Booster frowned. "English Skeets, you are anchored to your original timeline's memory. As reality shifts, you retain awareness of what was while others adapt to what is." Booster's grin faded completely. "So, the universe changes, and I'm the only one who remembers." "Yes, sir." A cold weight settled in his chest. "That wasn't just bad. That was terrifying, Captain," the science officer said suddenly, her voice tense. "I'm detecting a fluctuation in historical records." "What kind of fluctuation?" "Minor at first log entries, star charts, personnel files, but they're updating in real time." "Updating," the captain repeated. "Yes, sir." "As if history is being rewritten." Booster stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. Something's messing with the timeline and I think it followed me here." The captain studied him carefully. "Or you caused it." Booster didn't deny it, because deep down he was starting to believe it too. Suddenly, the ship lurched, not physically, but something deeper, more fundamental. The hum of the engines wavered, lights flickering for a fraction of a second. And then everything changed. Booster gasped. The bridge was different, subtly, disturbingly. The uniforms slightly altered, the intensity shifted, even the arrangement of consoles had changed, as if someone had edited reality with a careless hand. "What the?" He spun around, heart pounding. "Okay, that definitely wasn't there before." The crew looked at him like he'd just shouted nonsense. "Sir," one officer said cautiously. Booster pointed wildly. "That console. It was over there. And you," he looked at another officer, his voice faltering. "You had a different rank insignia 5 seconds ago." The officer frowned. "I've held this rank for 3 years." "No," Booster said, shaking his head, panic creeping into his voice. "No, that's not right. That's not how it was." "Mr. Carter," the captain said, stepping closer. "Whatever you're experiencing, I'm not crazy." Booster snapped. The words echoed across the bridge, sharper than he intended. Silence followed. Booster took a breath, trying to steady himself. "Look, I know how this sounds, but something is changing things. Little pieces at a time. And I'm the only one who can see it." "Convenient," the captain said. Booster winced. "Yeah, I know." Skeets hovered beside him, projecting a faint holographic display only Booster could see. Data scrolled rapidly, timestamps, coordinates, probability shifts. "Sir," Skeets said urgently, "the rate of temporal distortion is increasing. If this continues, the entire timeline could collapse into paradox." Booster swallowed hard. "And I'm guessing that's bad." "Extremely." Before Booster could respond, the science officer spoke again, her voice rising with alarm. "Captain, I'm detecting a localized temporal echo forming near the ship." On screen, the view screen flickered. At first it looked like a distortion space bending unnaturally, light twisting into impossible shapes. But then, it began to take form. A silhouette, humanoid, flickering between states, as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Booster's blood ran cold. "Tell me I'm the only one seeing that," he whispered. This time, he wasn't. "I see it," the captain said quietly. The figure stabilized for a moment, and then it looked directly at Booster. Not at the ship, not at the crew, at him. Booster took a step back. "Okay, that's new." The figure's form glitched, its outline fracturing into overlapping versions of itself, older, younger, broken, hollow, existing at once. And then it spoke. Not aloud, not through speakers, but directly into Booster's mind. "You do not belong." Booster clutched his head, staggering. "Yeah, I've been getting that a lot lately." The voice deepened, layered with echoes of countless timelines. "You tore the boundary. You opened the path." "I didn't mean to," Booster shouted. "It was an accident." "Accidents reshape realities." The figure flickered again, its presence growing more stable, more real. "And now we follow." Booster's heart pounded. The thing tilted its head, as if amused. "Not all things are bound by time as you understand it." "Michael John Carter." Booster froze. It knew his name. "You brought us a doorway," it continued, "and we've been waiting." The distortion surged, the figure expanding, its form stretching across space itself. Alarms blared. "Captain, the anomaly is destabilizing," the science officer shouted. "It's increasing in mass, energy levels are off the charts." Booster stared at the thing, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you?" The figure's many overlapping faces seemed to smile. "We are what remains when time forgets itself." And then it moved, straight toward the ship. The captain's voice cut through the chaos. Red alert. All hands, battle stations, phasers powered up, shields flared, but Booster couldn't move, because for the first time since he put on that suit, since he built his legend on lies and half-truths, he realized something. This wasn't a situation he could bluff his way out of. This wasn't a crowd he could impress. This was something far bigger, far older, and far more dangerous than anything he had ever faced, and it was here, because of him. What if the entity closing in on the ship wasn't trying to destroy them, but to correct the manned Booster Gold was the error it had come to erase? What if every second he remained aboard was pushing the Federation closer to a timeline where it never existed at all? The ship didn't shake. It didn't tremble under impact or strain. Instead, it flickered like a thought, struggling to exist. Booster staggered as the deck beneath his feet seemed to phase in and out of reality for a split second. Around him, Starfleet officers snapped into motion, trained, precise, disciplined, but even their movements carried a faint stutter, like frames missing from a film. Shields holding at 90%. Someone shouted, "Temporal flux increasing across all decks." "Captain, the anomaly is..." The officer froze mid-sentence, not paused, frozen. Her eyes locked forward, her body suspended like a statue caught between heartbeats. Booster's breath hitched. "Guys," no one responded, because they couldn't. Time had stopped. Not everywhere, just here, just enough. Booster turned slowly, dread curling in his chest. The entity was no longer outside the ship. It was inside, standing at the center of the bridge, its form shifting between possibilities, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes something that didn't even resemble a person at all. Its presence bent the air, warping light and shadow into impossible geometries. Booster swallowed hard. "Okay, new rule. When the creepy time ghost thing gets inside your ship, that's officially a bad day." The entity tilted its head, as if studying him. "You perceive the fracture," it said, its voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You remember what has been undone." Booster forced a shaky grin. "Yeah, well, I've always had a good memory. Memory is a burden." The thing stepped closer. Each movement didn't just cross space, it crossed versions of space. Booster saw after him as is trailing behind it. Echoes of paths it had taken in timelines that no longer existed. "You are the anomaly," it continued. "A deviation from all established outcomes." Booster raised his hands. "Okay, yeah, I've been called worse. You do not belong in this continuum. Yeah, we've established that. Working on it." The entity's form flickered, stabilizing into something almost human. Almost. "And yet, you persist." Booster's smile faded. "Look, whatever you are, I didn't come here to break anything. I just made a wrong turn." "There are no wrong turns," it said. "Only consequences." The words hit harder than any punch. Booster's mind raced. "Okay, so what? You're here to fix things, put everything back the way it was." "Yes." A flicker of hope sparked in his chest. "Great. Fantastic. Love that plan. So, how do we do it?" The entity's many-layered gaze locked onto him. "We remove the cause." The hope died instantly. Booster blinked. "And by cause, you mean you." Silence. Heavy, final. Booster let out a slow breath. "Right, of course you do." The entity raised a hand, or something like a hand. Space warped around it. Threads of time unraveling into visible strands, twisting and coiling like living things. "If you are erased," it said, "the fracture will seal. The timeline will stabilize. This universe will return to its intended path." Booster's heart pounded in his ears. Erase him. Not kill. Not destroy. Erase like he had never existed. He laughed weakly. "You know, I always figured I'd go out in a blaze of glory, maybe saving a planet. Big heroic moment. Crowd cheering. Statues. This is not about glory." "Yeah," Booster muttered. "I'm starting to get that." The strands of time tightened around the entity's hand, forming something that looked disturbingly like a weapon, though it didn't cut or burn. It unmade. Booster took a step back. "Okay, hold on. Let's not rush into the whole erasing me from existence thing. I mean, there's gotta be another way, right? I fixed the timeline. You go back to wherever you came from. Everyone's happy. There is no alternative." "Come on," Booster pressed, his voice rising. "You're telling me the entire universe hinges on one guy? That's ridiculous." "It is not the individual," the entity replied. "It is the disruption you represent." Booster's mind spun. Disruption. That was his whole life, wasn't it? A guy from the future, stealing tech, faking heroics, chasing fame in a timeline that wasn't his to shape. He'd always told himself it didn't matter, that no one got hurt, that it was harmless. But now an entire universe was unraveling because of him. Booster's voice dropped, quieter. If I go, everything goes back to normal. Yes. He glanced around the frozen bridge, at the captain mid-command, at the officers, caught in motion, at a universe that didn't know him, didn't need him, but was now at risk, because he'd stumbled into it. For the first time in a long time, Booster Gold didn't have a joke, didn't have a plan, didn't have an angle, just a choice. Boss Skeets whispered, his voice trembling with something that almost sounded like fear. I am detecting a potential alternative. Booster's head snapped toward the small drone. You are. It is. Highly improbable. Risk factor exceeds 99%. Booster let out a breath. That's practically my comfort zone. What have you got? The entity's form shifted, sensing the change. There is no escape, it said. Booster smirked faintly. Yeah, well, I've never been great at following the rules, Skeets, he murmured. Tell me fast. The drone projected a rapid stream of data-fractured timelines, overlapping realities, a single thread weaving through chaos. A temporal convergence point, Skeets said. If you can reach it, you may be able to redirect the fracture, contain it, without erasing yourself. Booster's eyes widened. Probability of success is extremely low. The entity stepped forward, the weapon of unmaking forming fully in its grasp. Your resistance is irrelevant. Booster clenched his fists. Low odds, impossible plan, universe on the line. Yeah, that sounded about right. He looked back at the entity, a flicker of his old grin returning, smaller this time, but real. You know what, he said. I've made a career out of beating impossible odds. This is not a game. No, Booster said quietly. For once, it's not. The entity raised its hand. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Booster shifted his stance, energy crackling faintly around his suit as Skeets fed him coordinates. One chance, one path, one shot at fixing everything. Okay. Booster whispered to himself. No pressure. The entity struck, and Booster Gold moved. What if the only way to outrun erasure itself was to dive deeper into the broken timeline and risk becoming the very paradox that destroys everything? What if Booster's last chance wasn't to escape, but to confront every version of himself he'd ever tried to hide from? Time didn't resume. It shattered. The moment the entity struck, reality splintered into 1,000 overlapping fragments. Booster didn't feel himself run, felt himself skip, leaping between instants like a stone skimming across a frozen ocean. The bridge vanished. The ship vanished. The ship vanished. Everything vanished. And Booster Gold was falling. Not through space, not through air, but through moments. Flashes erupted around him, scenes, lives, histories colliding all at once. A battlefield under alien skies. A city glowing with neon in a future that no longer existed. A crumbling timeline where Starfleet insignias lay buried beneath dust and ruin. Booster gritted his teeth. Skeets, tell me I'm going the right way. You are on the only viable path, Sir, Skeets replied, his voice flickering with interference. But the convergence point is unstable. You miss it. I don't get a second try. Yeah, I got that. A shockwave rippled behind him. Booster didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could feel it. The entity was following, not chasing, correcting every jump Booster made. Every shift between fractured seconds, the thing adjusted, closing the gap with terrifying precision. You cannot escape correction. Its voice echoed through the collapsing timeline. Booster forced a breath, focusing on the glowing coordinates. Skeets projected in front of him, one thin thread cutting through chaos. Not escaping, Booster muttered, improvising. Another leap, and suddenly he hit something solid. Booster stumbled forward, boots slamming onto metallic ground. The world snapped into place around him, stabilizing just enough to feel real. He looked up and froze. It was a museum. Glass displays lined the walls, illuminated by soft blue light. Holographic plaques flickered beside artifacts, uniforms, weapons, fragments of ships long gone. And at the center, a statue, golden, familiar. Booster's breath caught in his throat. No way. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The statue was him, older, more composed, standing tall, confident, not the forced confidence Booster wore like armor, but something deeper, something earned. The plaque beneath it read, Michael John Carter, the savior of the converged timeline. Booster blinked. Okay, that's new. Skeets hovered beside him, scanning rapidly. Sir, this appears to be a future echo, a possible outcome of your actions. Booster let out a shaky laugh. So, I make it out of this. I actually pull it off, uncertain. This is only one potential resolution. Booster stared at the statue, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, real hope, not the kind he faked for cameras or headlines, the kind that meant something. Guess I finally get my statue, he said softly. But at what cost? Skeets asked. The question lingered. Heavy Booster's smile faded slightly. Yeah, he murmured. There's always a catch. The room flickered. For a split second, the statue changed. Cracked. Broken. The plaque glitched. The words rewriting themselves. Michael John Carter, catalyst of the temporal collapse. Booster's stomach dropped. Okay, I don't like that version. The museum began to destabilize, walls phasing in and out, exhibits shifting between states of existence. Sir Skeets said urgently, this convergence point is collapsing. You must stabilize it. How? By anchoring a fixed outcome. Booster spun around. And how exactly do I do that? You must choose which version of events becomes real. Booster stared at him. You're kidding. I am not equipped for humor, sir. The space around them warped again. Multiple versions of the same moment began to overlap, different futures bleeding into each other. In one, the museum stood pristine, the statue shining bright. In another, it lay in ruins, the statue shattered beyond recognition. In a third, there was no museum at all, just emptiness. Booster's pulse thundered in his ears. So I pick one, and that locks in the timeline. Yes, sir, and if I pick wrong? Skeets hesitated. Then that outcome becomes absolute. Booster let out a breath. No pressure, right? The entity's presence surged behind him. The air twisted, time itself bending as the being forced its way into the convergence point. You prolong the inevitable, it said, its voice heavier now, more distorted. All paths lead to correction. Booster turned slowly, his expression hardening. Yeah, he said. Well, I've never been a big fan of inevitability. The entity advanced, its form stabilizing further stronger here, closer to its true state. You cannot choose a future that defies balance. Booster glanced back at the shifting versions of his statue. Hero, failure, nothing. His whole life he'd been chasing one thing: fame, recognition, proof that he mattered. But now it wasn't about that. It couldn't be, because this wasn't just his story anymore. It was everyone's. Booster clenched his fists. Okay, he said quietly. No more shortcuts. The entity raised its hand, time unraveling around it once more. Your choice is irrelevant. Booster shook his head. No, it's not. He took a step toward the shifting futures, his voice steady now. For the first time, it actually matters. The timelines flickered faster, the possibilities narrowing, collapsing toward a single point. The entity lunged. Booster reached out and made his choice. The world exploded into light. What if the future Booster chose wasn't the one where he became a legend, but the one where no one would ever know what he sacrificed? What if saving the timeline meant erasing the very fame he'd spent his whole life chasing? The light didn't fade. It collapsed, pulled inward like a dying star, folding reality into a single, blinding point, before snapping everything back into place. Booster hit the ground hard. Air rushed into his lungs as if he'd been drowning, his body trembling from the strain of the jump. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely process that he was still there. Skeets, he rasped. Status. The small drone flickered beside him, its system stabilizing. Temporal convergence. Contained. Timeline integrity. Partially restored. Booster let out a weak laugh. Partially, I'll take it. He pushed himself up, muscles protesting, and looked around. The museum was gone. The fractured timelines were gone. In their place, the bridge, the same Starfleet bridge he'd left behind, clean, structured, alive with motion. Officers moved again, time flowing normally, as if nothing had ever happened. For them it hadn't. Booster exhaled slowly. Okay, that's a good sign. But something felt different, quieter. He glanced at the crew. No one was looking at him. No one was reacting. It was like he wasn't even there. Hello, Booster said, waving a hand. Nothing. The captain stood at the center, issuing commands. Report on the anomaly. It's gone, sir, the science officer replied. No temporal distortions detected. It's as if it never existed. Booster's smile flickered. Yeah, about that. He stepped forward. Captain I. The captain walked right past him. No acknowledgement, no hesitation, just through. Booster froze. Okay, he whispered. That's new, Skeets, he said, his voice tightening. Tell me what's going on. There was a pause, a long one, and when Skeet spoke, his voice was quieter than Booster had ever heard it. Sir, in stabilizing the timeline, you selected a reality in which your presence was removed from recorded events. Booster blinked. Removed? Yes, sir. He laughed nervously. Removed as in forgotten. Like, oh yeah, that guy was here for a minute. Skeets didn't answer right away. Booster's smile slowly faded. In this timeline, the drone said carefully, you were never here. Silence. Heavy crushing. Booster took a step back, shaking his head. No, that's not right. I fixed it. I saved everything. That should count for something. It does, Sir. Skeets replied softly, but not in a way anyone else can perceive. Booster looked around the bridge again. The crew carried on. The captain gave orders. Life continued, perfectly intact, perfectly stable, and completely unaware of him. Booster let out a hollow laugh. So, that's it? That's the big heroic ending. Save the universe. And nobody even knows you were there. His voice cracked slightly. Not even a thank you. Skeets hovered closer. Sir. Booster waved him off. No, it's fine. He stopped, swallowing hard. It's fine, but it wasn't, because this was the opposite of everything he'd ever wanted. No crowds, no fame, no legacy, just silence. He turned away from the crew, staring out at the stars beyond the viewport. They were stable now. No flickering, no shifting, just the vast, endless calm of a universe that had been saved. Guess that's the job, huh? He muttered. Do the right thing, even if nobody's watching. For a moment, he just stood there, alone, and then a flicker. So small, it almost went unnoticed. The stars shifted. Booster's eyes narrowed. No. We fixed this, Skeets, he said sharply. Tell me, that was just my imagination. Skeets scanned rapidly, detecting residual temporal instability. Minimal, but present. Booster's heart sank. You're kidding me. The fracture has been contained, Skeets said, but not entirely eliminated. Booster let out a frustrated breath. Of course not. Why would anything ever be easy? Another flicker, this time more noticeable. A ripple across space, like something pushing against the fabric of reality from the other side. Booster's expression hardened. That thing, he said quietly. It's still out there, isn't it? Yes, sir. And it's not done. No, sir. Booster clenched his fists, the weight of everything settling back onto his shoulders. He'd made the sacrifice. He'd fixed the timeline, and it still wasn't over. Unbelievable, he muttered. He glanced back at the crew one last time. At the captain who would never know his name. At the ship he'd saved, but could never be part of, and then he turned away. All right, Booster said, his voice steady again, a faint edge of determination cutting through the exhaustion. Round 2. Skeets hovered beside him. Sir, without recognition, without support, your chances of success are significantly reduced. Booster smirked faintly. Yeah, well, wouldn't be the first time I've worked without a fan club. He looked out at the stars again, this time, not as a stage, not as an audience, but as something worth protecting. Let's go save a universe, he said quietly. Behind him, the bridge carried on. Unchanged, unaware, and somewhere, beyond the edges of time, the entity stirred again. Stronger, closer, learning, waiting. Because this time, Booster Gold wouldn't just be correcting a mistake. He'd be fighting something that had already adapted to him, something that now understood. He wouldn't choose himself, and that made him predictable. What if the entity had already learned Booster's greatest weakness? Not his arrogance, not his recklessness, but his willingness to sacrifice himself. What if this time, saving the universe meant choosing not to be the hero? The stars were quiet again, too quiet. Booster drifted just outside the hull of the Starfleet vessel, his golden suit reflecting the calm of a universe that looked perfectly intact. From the outside, everything was normal, no distortions, no fractures, no signs that reality had nearly collapsed. But he knew better. Skeets, Booster murmured, eyes scanning the darkness. Give me a read. Residual temporal waves are increasing in frequency. Skeets replied, low amplitude, but consistent. It is attempting to re-enter this continuum. Booster nodded slowly. Yeah, I figured it wouldn't just give up. A faint ripple passed through the stars, again barely visible, like a breath against glass. Booster clenched his jaw. It's learning. Yes, sir. Skeets confirmed. It is adapting to your previous actions. Booster exhaled, floating there in silence for a moment. Of course it is, he muttered. Because why wouldn't the universe throw me an evolving time monster? Another ripple, closer this time. Booster's suit hummed as he powered up, energy coursing through the gold plating. All right, if it's coming back, we stop it before it fully crosses over, Sir Skeets said cautiously. Based on its previous behavior, direct confrontation is unlikely to succeed. Booster smirked faintly. Good thing I'm not great at doing things the smart way. But even as he said it, something felt off, different. The ripple didn't expand like before. It focused, condensed into a single point, directly in front of him. Booster's eyes narrowed. That's new. The distortion sharpened, twisting into a familiar shape. Humanoid, stable, controlled. And then, it stepped through. The entity no longer flickered, no longer fractured. It stood before him with terrifying clarity, its form, now precise, defined, almost human. It had learned how to exist here. Booster's smirk faded. Okay, I liked you better when you were glitchy. The entity regarded him calmly. You chose self-erasure to preserve the timeline, it said. Its voice no longer chaotic, but cold, focused. You will do so again. Booster stiffened. Yeah, about that. You are predictable. The words hit harder than they should have. Booster frowned. Predictable me. You clearly don't know my brand. I do now. The entity raised a hand, but this time it didn't attack. Instead, space around them shifted. Booster blinked, and suddenly, he wasn't outside the ship anymore. He was back on the bridge. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The lights were dim. The consoles flickered. And the crew, they were gone. Booster turned slowly, unease creeping in. Okay, this is officially creepy. Observe, the entity said. The view screen lit up. A timeline unfolded before him, not as data, but as reality itself. He saw the ship, the crew, the captain, and then he saw himself. Not as he was now, but as he had been. The moment he chose to erase himself. The moment he saved everything. The moment the universe stabilized. Booster crossed his arms. Yeah, I've seen this one. Big heroic sacrifice. Nobody remembers. Very tragic. What's your point? The image shifted, continued, beyond what Booster had seen before. His expression changed. Wait, the timeline didn't end with stability. It decayed, slowly at first, then faster. The same ripples, the same fractures, returning stronger. Booster's stomach dropped. No, that's not. You delayed the collapse, the entity said. You did not prevent it. Booster stared at the unfolding destruction, stars flickering out, systems collapsing, history unraveling piece by piece. All that, for nothing, he whispered. Not nothing, the entity corrected. Data. Booster looked up sharply. Data, you demonstrated a pattern, it said. Faced with collapse, you choose self-sacrifice. You remove yourself to preserve the whole. Booster's mind raced, and you used that to refine the outcome. The timeline shifted again. This time, faster, more precise. Booster watched in horror as the entity manipulated events, adjusting variables, pushing moments, guiding outcomes, until there it was. A version of the future where Booster made the same choice. But this time, it didn't save the universe. It destroyed it completely. Booster staggered back. No, that's not possible. You are the constant, the entity said. The variable we control. Booster's voice rose. I'm not something you control. You already are. The words echoed like a verdict. Booster's chest tightened. For the first time he felt it. Not fear, not panic, but something worse. Doubt. Everything he'd done, every choice, every sacrifice. Had it all just been part of the problem? You see now, the entity continued, stepping closer. Why you must be removed. Booster clenched his fists. No. The entity paused. Booster's voice steadied. Stronger now. You're wrong. Explain. Booster took a breath, his mind racing, not with panic this time, but with something sharper. Clarity. You think I'm predictable, he said. That I'll always make the same choice. You have. Yeah, Booster admitted. I have. He looked at the collapsing timelines around him, at the destruction, at the inevitability the entity was so certain of, and then, he smiled. Not the fake, showy grin he used for crowds. Something quieter, more dangerous. But what if I don't? The entity's gaze sharpened. That would contradict all observed outcomes. Booster shrugged slightly. Guess it's a good thing I've never been great at following expectations. The timelines flickered. For the first time, uncertainty crept into the entity's form. A deviation is unlikely. Booster's smile widened just a little. Yeah, he said, but not impossible. The bridge began to dissolve around them, the vision collapsing as reality strained under the weight of competing outcomes. The entity stepped forward. Any deviation will result in collapse. Booster met its gaze. Then maybe, he said quietly, I stop trying to save the timeline and start changing it. The words hung in the air. Radical, dangerous, unpredictable. Exactly what the entity feared. For the first time since it had appeared, it hesitated. And Booster Gold, the man who had built his life on fake heroics, finally made a decision. That wasn't about being a hero at all. What if the only way to defeat something that controls time is to become the one variable it can't predict? What if Booster Gold's final move isn't sacrifice, isn't heroism, but chaos? The kind that rewrites destiny itself. The silence between them stretched thin, not empty but charged. The entity stood still, its form now perfectly stabilized, its presence no longer flickering but rooted, like it had fully claimed its place in this universe. For something born outside of time, it had learned frighteningly fast how to exist within it, but that was its weakness. It had learned patterns, and Booster Gold was about to break them. You intend to alter the outcome, the entity said, its voice low, analytical. But all alterations collapse into predictable endpoints. Booster tilted his head slightly, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight that wasn't physical. Yet he said, that's the problem with you. The entity didn't respond. Booster's eyes sharpened. You think everything follows a path, that every choice leads somewhere you can calculate. He tapped the side of his helmet. But you've been watching the wrong version of me. Clarify. Booster smirked faintly. The version that sacrifices himself. The one that plays the hero. He shook his head. That's the story I told myself. The version I thought people wanted. He took a slow step forward. But that's not who I really am. The entity's gaze didn't waver, but something subtle shifted. A recalibration, a reassessment. You are a temporal anomaly, it said. Your behavior has been mapped. Booster chuckled. Mapped. Sure, understood. He shook his head again. Not even close. The fractured bridge around them flickered, multiple timelines pressing in, trying to stabilize, trying to resolve. Booster raised a hand, and for the first time, he didn't reach for a solution that fixed everything. He reached for something else. Skeets, he said quietly, pull up every unstable fragment we've got. Sir, that would do it. A beat. Then Skeets complied. The space around them exploded into overlapping realities. Every broken piece of the timeline Booster had passed through. The ruined futures, the fractured presents, the incomplete possibilities. Chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. The entity's form flickered just slightly. You would destabilize the convergence further, it said. Booster nodded. Exactly. That will result in total collapse. Yeah, Booster said. For you. The entity stepped forward. You cannot survive such an outcome. Booster shrugged. Maybe not. For a split second, the old fear flickered in his eyes, but it didn't stay. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about being remembered. It wasn't even about being the hero. It was about breaking the one thing this entity relied on. Control. You learned my patterns, Booster said. You figured out how I think, how I act, how I choose. He spread his arms, gesturing to the storm of fractured timelines around them. But you never accounted for one thing. The entity's voice dropped. State it. Booster smiled. I can choose to be wrong. And then he acted. Not with precision, not with strategy, but with absolute, reckless unpredictability. Booster surged forward, not toward the entity, but through the fractured timelines themselves. He grabbed hold of unstable moments, ripping them loose, forcing them to overlap, collide, contradict each other. A future where the Federation thrived slammed into one where it never existed. A past where Booster never arrived collided with one where he ruled as a false hero. Contradictions stacked on contradictions. Reality screamed. The entity reacted instantly, trying to stabilize the chaos, trying to correct, to guide, to force everything back into a coherent path. But there was no path anymore, only noise. Stop, the entity commanded. This deviation exceeds all viable outcomes. Booster laughed, shrilly laughed this time, wild and unrestrained. Yeah, he shot back. Welcome to my life. The timelines twisted faster, collapsing inward, tearing at the entity's form. For the first time since it had appeared, it began to lose cohesion. You are destabilizing existence itself, it said, its voice fracturing again, echoes returning. Good, Booster replied. Now you're on my level. The entity reached for him, but its movements were slower now, less precise, its predictive models failing under the weight of infinite contradictions. You cannot maintain this, it insisted. Booster's grin faltered slightly, but But he didn't stop. "I don't have to," he said. "Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" Booster glanced at Skeets. The drone understood instantly. "Sir, if you continue, the convergence will reach critical instability in approximately 5 seconds. Booster cut him off. "Yeah, I figured." The entity's form began to unravel, pieces of it slipping out of sync, unable to anchor itself in a reality that no longer had rules. "You would destroy yourself," it said. Booster met its gaze one last time. "Maybe," and then, quieter, "but this time, it's my choice." The timelines collapsed, all of them, into a single, impossible point, and then, nothing. No light, no sound, no time, just stillness. For a moment or an eternity there was no universe at all. And then, a breath, a single, quiet breath. Stars, stable, unbroken. The Starfleet vessel drifted peacefully through space, its systems humming, its crew moving as they always had, focused, precise, unaware. The captain stood at the center of the bridge. "All systems normal," the science officer reported. "No temporal anomalies detected." The captain nodded. "Maintain course." Outside, the stars remained steady, unchanged, as if nothing had ever threatened them, as if no one had ever saved them, and far beyond the reach of sensors, beyond the edges of recorded history, a flicker of gold. Booster drifted in the void, his suit dim, systems barely operational. His breathing was slow, uneven, but there. "Skeets," he whispered. The drone flickered weakly beside him. "Sir, we are outside standard temporal coordinates." Booster let out a faint, exhausted laugh. "So, nowhere." "Yes, sir." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle. No applause, no recognition, no legacy, just peace. "Did it work?" he asked quietly. Skeets paused. Then, "Yes, sir. The entity has been fully destabilized. The timeline is secure." Booster nodded faintly. "Good." He drifted there, alone in the endless dark, the weight of everything finally lifting. "You know," he murmured, a small smile forming, "I always thought being a hero meant people knowing your name." Skeets hovered closer, its light steady despite the void. "And now, sir." Booster opened his eyes, gazing out at the infinite. "Now," he said softly, "I think it just means doing the job." A beat. Then, with the last of his strength, Booster activated a faint pulse from his suitor signal. Not to be found, but to keep moving, to keep going. Because somewhere, somehow, there would always be another timeline, another mistake, another chance, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The golden light faded into the darkness, not erased, not forgotten, just unseen, and in a universe that would never know his name. Booster Gold had finally become something real, a hero not defined by fame, but by choice.